All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a big one. We're diving into two technologies that are really shaping our future and, let's be honest, sparking a ton of debate: digital IDs and central bank digital currencies. Our goal here is to cut through all that noise and figure out what's actually at stake. I'm sure you've seen this phrase online, or, something very close to it. It's punchy, it's definitive, and it absolutely grabs your attention.
And the thing is, it's not presented as a possibility, right? It's presented as a done deal, an inevitable future that's already been decided for us behind closed doors.
Okay, let's just pump the brakes for a second. Instead of getting swept up in all that emotion, we're going to carefully pull this idea apart and separate what's real from what's just imagined.
See, this is how the whole total control story gets you. It's actually pretty clever. It works by deliberately mashing these three very different things together. It takes a real technology, bolts on a very real political risk, and then presents the absolute worst-case scenario as a complete certainty. And look, the reason this narrative spreads like wildfire is because it hits a nerve. It taps into a really deep human fear, the feeling of depending on these massive, complex systems that we don't fully get, let alone control. I mean, we already rely on the power grid, the internet, the banks, but when you start talking about combining our identity and our money, it suddenly feels a whole lot more personal.
All right, so let's start by breaking down the first piece of this puzzle: digital ID. What are we actually talking about here? If you strip away all the hype and all the fear, a digital ID isn't some brand new, scary concept. States have always issued identity. Think about names, social security numbers, driver's licenses. This is just a new container, a new format that makes verifying who you are instantaneous in our digital world. So when governments pitch these systems, the arguments sound pretty good, right? Less fraud, faster services, easier access for everyone. But, and this is the really critical part, those exact same benefits are a direct pipeline to the danger. Consolidation is just a fancy word for efficiency, but it also means concentrating a whole lot of power in one place. And when you do that, both mistakes and abuse can scale up dramatically. But here's something absolutely crucial to understand. While the potential for all that bad stuff is real, it is not automatic. These worst-case scenarios aren't, built-in features. A digital ID system doesn't just magically become a social credit system. To get there, you need a whole bunch of new political decisions, new laws, and very specific ways to enforce them. Yeah, a really good way to think about it is like plumbing in a house. The pipes themselves, that's just the infrastructure. They don't do anything on their own. What flows through them and what the rules are for that flow, that's a totally separate and totally political choice. Okay, so that's digital ID. Now let's move on to the second piece of the puzzle. And this is the one that really gets people fired up: central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. See, the moment you say CBDC, people's minds don't go to abstract monetary policy. No way. It gets personal fast. It's not about the economy. It's about my money. And you know what? This isn't some crazy conspiracy theory. Technically, they're right. By its very nature, digital money allows for more control and more visibility than a $20 bill in your pocket. That is just a fact of its design. But, and this is the huge mistake these narratives make, they act like this kind of control is brand new. And it's just not. Your bank already tracks your transactions. Governments can already go to court to get your accounts frozen. And payment processors like Visa or PayPal, they can and absolutely do deny service to people. So the control itself isn't new. What's new is how it's organized. A CBDC doesn't invent control out of thin air, it just rearranges it, and it puts more of that power directly in the hands of the state. So this isn't really a technical question about code, it's a political question. Who do you trust more? A handful of big private companies or your government? Okay, so if the big threat isn't some secret master plan cooked up in a smoke-filled room, then what are the real risks? What should we actually be worried about? It turns out there's one simple question you can ask that cuts through almost all the noise and fear around these kinds of systems. And that question is all about having an exit. What does that mean? Well, can you just opt out? Can you choose not to use it? Is physical cash still around, and is it actually a viable option? And can other systems, whether it's private banks or even decentralized currencies like crypto, are they allowed to compete? Because here's the bottom line. Systems become truly dangerous not when they're powerful, but when they become unavoidable. And this right here really gets to the heart of the matter.
We spend so much time worrying about these big cinematic threats, the hidden cabals with a global off switch. But the real dangers, they're usually way more boring. We're talking about things like weak legal safeguards, emergency powers that somehow become permanent, and a serious lack of independent oversight.
So what's the takeaway here? Well, the next time you hear one of those huge, dramatic claims, don't just accept it blindly, but also don't just dismiss it out of hand. Instead, try to translate it. You hear something like this, and yeah, it's powerful. It gets an emotional reaction. But it's so broad, it's almost useless. It just shuts down the conversation. But what's the real concern hiding under that big, scary statement? Now that's something we can work with. That's a real, legitimate political stance. It's a starting point for productive discussion about laws, about independent courts, about transparency, and yeah, about the power of the public to push back. And that really brings us to the final question we want to leave you with. Forget the Hollywood movie plots for a second. What are those boring but absolutely essential limits and safeguards that you would demand? Because understanding that slow, messy, and often frustrating process of setting limits, well, it's a lot less exciting than a conspiracy theory. But in the real world, it is so much more powerful.